Hi all, let's look at another interesting game of Leela Chess against the great Fire chess engine. And the set opening for this was the French Defence, and after knight f3 here, which is a bit unusual compared to d4, we have knight c6, and this transposes now, so these are the first four ply given to both engines, and it transposes into a knight c6 French, which is something I've played around with quite a bit because of Watson's dangerous weapons in the French book. It's quite an interesting surprise weapon. White played the advanced variation here, which is actually pretty effective. There's no c5 to hit the pawn chain. This is actually quite an effective choice. f6 was played here. Now, according to ChessBase Livebook, there's a player called Sahovic, who is around 2450, who specializes in this system and actually plays b6 here quite a bit. That's his preferred choice. So he's won, for example, a good game against Grandmaster Westernin in the Reykjavik tournament of 1982. So that's interesting. f6 has been played overall by some weaker players, but it is the choice of Fire here. So very interesting. c3. Also relevant here is bishop b5. This is a critical test used by many strong players. For example, Emil Sutovsky, who's like 2650 Grandmaster, has played this with some success. Okay, so let's see. Here, though, we have c3. So f takes, knight takes. D takes was also okay. White's not losing anything much by doing this either. This is a good position, for example. But we have here f takes, knight takes instead of d takes. Now knight takes, d takes, g6. Okay. Now we have knight d2, knight h6, bishop d3, c5. So here white still has a pleasant position after knight f3 because this pawn chain is a bit soft. Actually, it can be readily underminable, and Leela goes for it after knight f7 with h4 to try and hit that pawn chain potentially. At the moment this threat is ignored and it's not actually used anyway here. So bishop b7, a waiting move, We have queen e2, so Leela's kind of put a waiting move in here. On h5 the problem is g5, and after queen e2, bishop e7, white has a small edge, but it's difficult to see how to really improve the position that much. So queen e2, queen e7, and in fact this is really amazing play now from Leela, as we've come to expect in the middle game. Pretty surprising move, you might think. Leela plays b4, so it's a kind of pawn sacrifice. This is ignored actually with c4. If black takes this pawn sacrifice, it seems rook b1 is really strong, trying to crash through to that second rank, pin things. There's congestion over here. So for example, taking here. This is just nasty for black. White's got all the pieces out of the box, so to speak, in this scenario. And in fact, black still has trouble castling. If that bishop can be protected, the rook can remain on the 7th in this example, or take this pawn. And yeah, it's just very favourable for white. So this gambit is very, very interesting. And you might think, well, instead of taking here, what about a5? Supporting that pawn for a bit. Maybe trying to shut down things with a4. In this case, h5, it seems. This scenario, bishop d2. And then c takes, g4, for example, ends up being quite nice for white as well. This scenario, it's pretty dangerous for black. So we have this trying to keep things closed in a way. Bishop c2, and now white actually threatens positioning to play a4 to answer a5 with b5, which would shut down that bishop and also support even things like bishop a3 later. So black goes for a5 here, before a4 has a chance. But yeah, if we ignore a4, I'll give you a scenario with a4. Yeah, this is just highly pleasant for white. Even h6, in fact, this is really dangerous continuation for black with a crashing attack down the h file. So it is actually pretty dangerous on the king side in any case as well. If black castles, h5 is extra venom. That's why it's good, these waiting moves before this. Get black to castle first. But we have a5, black's not castling. And Leela plays a pawn sack here, b5. So ready with a4 if black doesn't take it. Black did take it, so some pressure on the b file. Knight d4 with pressure not just on c6 but e6, which means if that's e5 point is supported, then queen g4 becomes a bit dangerous. We have queen d7, h5, bishop c5, hg, hg. Now rook takes away that knight from e5. So after bishop e3, in fact, because there's no pressure on e5, this introduces a few things. First of all, queen g4 is lurking here with that impressive knight hitting e6 with the queen. And it's difficult for black to actually defend e6 under some cases. Black actually played a very committal bishop to takes d4 in this position. If we look at this, if the bishop goes to a7, then knight takes c6. This scenario, there's actually knight takes a5 here. And for example, this is very favourable for white, this situation. If we look at that again, now instead of rook takes a5, let's say the bishop went back, then rook takes b7. Yeah, and in fact, this is really dangerous over here. If, for example, bishop takes f2 to try and win the knight, queen takes, rook takes, and it's that rook on the 7th means bishop takes g6 check is possible. For example, this, it's end of game after check. Queen g8 check, and then mating. So yeah, there's a lot of dangers here after bishop e3, which might help explain why black played the rather committal looking bishop takes d4. So bishop takes d4, queen e7, queen e3, now knight f7 was played. If black castled here, then bishop b6 hitting the rook and the pawn. This situation taking also introduces now queen a7. So this is nasty actually. Knight f7. Let's say king d2 here to support e5 first. And in fact, this is just very comfortable for white. This scenario, very, very comfortable. If we look at this again with rook e8 instead, then let's have a look now at queen a7 here, and then this kind of thing is a disaster for black. So yeah, there are a lot of disaster scenarios, it seems, on black castling. So knight f7, we have now bishop takes g6. Yeah, so giving up that pawn makes a lot of the variations much safer now, because this bishop and this pawn are a bit loose. So white actually played queen f4. The picture's changed significantly on bishop b6 here, because rook g8, this is fine for black. This scenario, opposite colour bishops, should be fine. So we have queen f4, knight h8, bishop drops back, rook f8, queen g3, knight f7, and the queen plunges in here, queen g7. On bishop b6, this is also okay actually. White's getting a small edge there, but this is looking more incisive, queen g7. Queen a3. Now the queen has to hold on to the rook here. We have bishop g6, knight d8, king f1, bishop d7, g4. In fact, Leela senses her pawn majority even at this point at move 31. So there's a, if f4 f5 can be achieved, we're getting dangerous passed pawns. Knight c6, and now there's bishop b6. So remember that if queen takes c3, then there's always queen takes f8. So the queen's protecting the rook. So we have queen actually coming back to challenge that queen. Now queen queen takes, knight takes. Bishop comes to h5 actually. Bishop c6. Bishop d4 closes down any d4 which might be in the future. Rook h8 and supports e5 of course. King e2. Now white, Leela, is getting ready for things like f4, f5 with maybe rook f1. We have bishop e8. Now let me show you a scenario here which is intriguing. Let's say black plays on the queen side without having this seemingly committal bishop exchange. f4, rook f1, bishop c5, and this scenario is great with f5. This is really thematic looking, creating very dangerous passed pawns. And in fact, we don't even need connected passed pawns. This is just where it's going to be here because of that double attack. This is a disaster scenario. Look at the winning connected passed pawns now. So yeah, there are a lot of basically disaster scenarios here. If we look at this again, this situation, it turns out that even bishop c5 is not even necessary. It seems f5, believe it or not, even with the apparent liability, this position is not so equal as it seems after taking here, giving up that bishop f6. This is also advantageous because any stepping in the king, there's king e2, king e2 to d1, which is really good. For example, here check taking is a good advantage. So it's all pretty dangerous, even with a piece sacrifice, even with f5 immediately. But that's not needed. The easy ways, I mean, the easy looking is bishop c5. But these situations imply that yeah, there's some big dangers here. Are they extinguished with bishop e8 though? I'm not sure they are. Leela takes and then f4. So f5 is still on the cards. This is a really thematic idea to play for f5. So rook h8, rook f1. In fact, this takes me back in time, well, to a book. Nigel Short on the Master Game was the up-and-coming British youngster. And Tony Miles, he had a game with Tony Miles on Master Game with an f5 thematic break against, I believe it was a French Defence, which Nigel Short won in the end. But it looked exactly kind of like this kind of scenario with a simplified position with f5 break. So, yeah, Leela's playing, as well as Nigel Short it seems, on the pawn breaks here. Very thematic looking pawn break, f5. Yeah, it's just the weight of the passed pawns. So this is actually ignored with b4, not to give two connected passed pawns that easily. Bishop c5, king d7, c takes, a takes, and here now f6. This looks to be very, very strong. f7, check, and now b3 is played. Yeah, black is basically losing a piece, and this is just not enough, this position. So yeah, the great Fire chess engine is a piece down here. Can it transpose into a drawn endgame like the mighty Stockfish is often able to do, it seems? It is a bishop down. Actually, funny enough, in this position, it doesn't seem that likely. Yeah, as long as there's one pawn here, this is not drawing to take a rook off. So, yeah, it looks as though this is convertible, and the e6 pawn is targeted. So, slowly and carefully targeting that e6 pawn. So there's rook f6 on the cards now. Yeah, the bishop is a bit of a liability, but it's kept protected while e6 is finally won. So it's just a matter of good technique and avoiding any problematic drawn positions, which is possible here now, given that a bishop and a pawn up especially. And in fact, so the suspense, is Leela able to convert this? Yes. It's looking as though it's the end of Fire in this game. Fire, it seems, has turned out to be the unlikely victim, or maybe, well, it was 8 that qualified from stage 1, but it seems Fire is going down to Leela quite a bit. Fire has been set on fire. Oh dear. Okay, I'm dreading to show you two of the Stockfish ones, to be honest. But so I thought I'd start with some decisive games today. A decisive game here. Hope you enjoyed this one. Before we try and delve into some very, very complex games against Stockfish, which I'm sure you're keen to see, at least highlight positions. But anyway, good stuff. I hope you'll agree. Comments, questions, likes, shares appreciated. Thanks very much.